Former North Charleston Police officer Michael Slager pled guilty to one count of a civil rights violation on Tuesday in downtown Charleston. In this special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I speak exclusively with attorney Mark Peper to discuss what's next. Well, Mark, it is so good to see you, man.
Quintin, always a pleasure, buddy. You look sharp as always.
Oh, you too.
I appreciate the phone call. It's always good to hear from you.
Well, likewise. One of these days, I hope you get one of those bow ties.
I'm going to get you one. That condition is, if we do this again, you got to wear a bow tie.
Sure,
Deal?
absolutely.
Okay,
That's
good.
really good.
Good.
Well, let me turn to the obvious.
Yeah.
And this is the headline for the Post and Courier newspaper for today. It reads this: Monumental Day for Civil Rights. Family thankful after Slager pleads guilty in federal case. State charge dropped. Let me take you back to 2:57 yesterday on Tuesday afternoon. Former North Charleston Police officer Michael Slager pled guilty in federal court to one count of civil rights violation. I'm wondering, where did your mind go to at 2:57 yesterday afternoon?
I was in the courtroom, and it was very matter of fact, very professional, very serious. The judge went through his colloquy with Mr. Slager, asked him if those were the facts that he was pleading guilty to. He said, "I accept your plea." And he got up and left. And we were all just kind of like, is it over? And at the strike of that gavel,
Right.
he was then a convicted felon. I didn't know that it was going to go down quite like that. I mean, I think we were all surprised to wake up yesterday morning and see that yesterday was the day that a lot of people have been waiting on for a little over 2 years now.
You talk about him really accepting all of these facts. Why did he take so long?
Well, that's a good question that only he probably would ever be able to answer. You know, it's a game of cat and mouse, the law is. When you're accused of a crime, the facts have to be determined by a jury of your peers. Now, along the way, you start realizing that it's more likely than not that a jury is going to find these facts to be the facts of your case. And at that point is when you kind of shift focus as a defendant in an attempt to kind of mitigate any damages or sentence.
Okay.
As you recall, 6 months ago, he was told by a jury of his peers that we still don't know what the facts are.
Right.
They couldn't come up with the correct facts, right? So the federal trial is really, when it got going, I think it became pretty clear to Mr. Slager that one way or another, whether it was in the federal court system or at the retrial in the state court, that the facts as presented by the state were going to be the facts that the jury abided by. When you're facing life plus up to 20 years on 2 other charges, plus life across the street, that's when you start singing a bit of a different tune in an attempt to maybe save yourself some time. Mm-hmm. And I get the impression that that's been the conversation the last 2-3 weeks.
Wow. If you were attorney Andy Savage right now, what would you be doing right now to really save Michael Slager?
So all of his effort over the next 6 to 8 weeks will be 2 things. One is gathering any and all evidence, for lack of a better word, to show Mr. Slager's character. Okay? The public has an opinion as to what his character was for about 5 minutes on a spring day in 2015. Andy's going to try to portray him as to what he believes Mr. Slager really is. A kind, gentle man, family, God-fearing man that grew up in this area, has friends in this area, has no criminal record. It's a punch-counterpunch. When the United States government focuses on those 5 minutes, Andy's going to try to punch back with, let's look at what else he's done with his life. Because that's what the sentencing judge is tasked with, to paint a picture and accept the picture that's been painted, and then make a determination as to what punishment Mr. Slager should receive. So he's going to want everything he can get his hands on, and it's Andy's job to answer your question, to provide him with as much beneficial information as he can. The second part is that he's going to want to attack the pre-sentence investigation. The pre-sentence investigation is going to reveal objectively a lot of issues and factors for the court to consider. The ones that benefit Mr. Slager, Andy's going to want to flush out.
Okay.
The ones that don't benefit Officer Slager, Andy's going to want to attack.
Mm-hmm.
So he'll be spending the next 6 or 8 weeks presenting his client in the best light, and then he'll switch gears to go on attack mode once the pre-sentence investigation comes out.
You said during your Facebook Live event, which I went back and looked at last night at Starbucks, you said basically, quote, today was the big important day. Might be a crazy question, but what was left out during that big important day in your mind?
It's easy for me as a lawyer, outside looking in, to say nothing that was left out. The justice system worked. Now, did it take too long? Sure.
Okay.
Right? It took too long to get to this point. But the wheels of justice aren't always a well-oiled machine all day, every day. Okay. Especially when you have two advocates such as Scarlett and the United States government and Andy Savage. That wheel's going to come off a little bit. That chain may bounce off a little bit. Now, eventually we got to where I think everyone thought we would get, which is the justice system working. Mr. Slager accepted the true facts that we've all known about since the video came out. I don't think anything was left out. Now, again, that's outside looking in. I can certainly see the Scott family, as pleased as they are that the matter's been resolved and he's taken responsibility for his actions. I could see their concern over the fact that he may not receive the same sentence that their loved one got, which is his life. The way I read the plea agreement, I think it's very unlikely that Officer Slager, Michael Slager, will receive a life sentence. I do. And I think they're aware of that, and so they probably don't feel that everything was accomplished yesterday. And I certainly can respect that.
Obviously, we know that now that he's already pled to most of these facts. And I know that you basically said, hey, Andy's going to try to paint him as probably a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
Go for it.
He doesn't have any criminal record.
Right.
Okay? That helps. Traditionally, in a case like this, the main factor that the defense attorney has to attack is, well, Judge, don't worry about what he did 5 years ago. Don't worry about that on his rap sheet, okay? He doesn't have anything. I mean, by all accounts, and I think the Scott family would agree with this, this was a good cop. This was a good man. He was serving the people of North Charleston. What happened that day, Andy has to take the position of, was just an anomaly, an out-of-body experience almost that doesn't reflect on Michael's character. He has no choice but to approach that. As we heard the Scott family say yesterday, specifically Mrs. Scott, I mean, they were very accepting and forgiving and gracious and grateful that this matter had been concluded, especially in light of the fact that he'd taken responsibilities for his actions. So those are the kind of things that are going to be presented to Judge Norton to consider. And the family is going to make a big presentation of their own, certainly.
Right. How do you think the public will define Michael Slager now that he's already pleaded to all these facts?
Well, they're going to define him as the law defines him, a convicted felon, a Class A violent convicted felon. He's admitted to those facts that we all now, whether we agree or disagree as to what we see on the video or you know what was right, what was wrong, we all have to agree that these are the facts. This is what happened. The government put these facts in writing, and Slager admitted to them. So I'm hoping that now, and our community's done great. I mean, as you know, right? I mean, if this type of situation had happened anywhere across the country, we'd still be having issues, right? Riots, everything, right? The community's done great. I think now, though, we can really maybe move on and move past this tragic incident that enveloped the entire Charleston area and held us hostage almost for the last 2 years. I think now that the facts have been agreed upon and everybody, can agree that this is exactly what happened, maybe we take that last final step to healing, where we can be more supportive of our law enforcement community as a whole now. But also where law enforcement can say, you can't do this. You can't do anything close to this. You will be held responsible. Justice will come after you and will win. So I think yesterday, the reason I said it was a monumental day, is that I think a lot of people, a lot of cops, a lot of minorities should look at this day as a monumental moment in our history moving forward. A day where cops will be held to the same standards that we're all held to. You can't commit a crime while on active duty. You just can't do it, and the justice system's not going to stand for it. At the same time, we need to look at cops in a better light. We need to look at Michael Slager as an outlier, not as a person that's indicative of every police officer in the state of South Carolina. That's just not, it's just not fair. I think we all can kind of agree and use this moment to our advantage moving forward.
You keep pointing to that plea agreement.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
Okay.
It's interesting. One thing that kind of got lost in the sauce yesterday is that Slager pled guilty to one indictment that charged him with violating Walter's Fourth Amendment rights, which he clearly did. We have a right in this country to be free from excessive force by police officers, okay? He admitted that he willfully used force that was unnecessary, right, and excessive. He pled guilty to that. What's interesting, though, is that he also agreed, by signing this plea agreement, that he would be sentenced as if he pled guilty to second-degree murder and obstruction of justice. That's a very creative plea agreement that was crafted among the parties. It tells me that the United States government said no to anything but being sentenced for second-degree murder, manslaughter, as we define it here in the state, right? And it also tells me that Slager's team said, we're not agreeing that that's what we did. We'll agree to violating his civil rights, right? And so then it was crafted, well, okay, if you agree to plead guilty to the indictment, would you agree to be sentenced as if you pled to, and that's when they struck that chord. So it's very interesting because it obviously puts him in a completely different guidelines. That's why life is still technically on the table.
And obviously Andy's still fighting this.
Sure.
Like he was back in December. But I'm wondering this. Let me go to Scarlett Wilson because, as you know, as part of the plea agreement, he won't face the state trial. She won't go after him from a state standpoint. What part of you says that she won this? What part of you says that she lost this?
Well, I think she accomplished exactly what she set out to do. When she moved forward with the indictments, she charged him with murder, which carries a life sentence, okay? She had some bumps in the road, right? She couldn't get 12 people to agree with her, right? But at the end of the day, he's facing a judge that has the ability to give him a life sentence. She's right back where she started. So I get the feeling that she looks at it as, could things have been different, smoother, better, faster, more efficient? Sure. But she's right where she wanted to be at the time that either a jury convicted him or he pled guilty, which is facing life in prison.
Let me turn to Pierre Philbin. Obviously, it's been a tough 2 years for him. As we sit here right now, Mark, where is he emotionally?
I talked to him yesterday, and I jokingly said on the Facebook Live last night, unless you've been living in the cave, you know what's going on.
Right.
Well, he must have been living in that cave because he didn't know. And so I called him and updated him mid-morning yesterday, and he was ecstatic. I explained to him that, I'm being told that he's going to plead guilty and the case is going to be over. Then I confirmed with him about 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon that, in fact, the case was over for all intents and purposes. It's certainly his role in the case, and he was extremely humbled. He was extremely relieved, very thankful for, obviously, my support and all. He's been held hostage by this thing for 2 years too. Not only physically having to be certain places at certain times, but emotionally. It's tough to move on from losing a loved one, a good friend, when you're constantly reminded of it personally and by the media and with everything going on. So I see big things for Pierre. He's grown up a lot over these last 2 years, a lot. And I'm very blessed to have been able to be with him through this process. I love me some Pierre. He's good people.
That's good to hear. And I hate to rehash this one more time, but that plea agreement, if someone were to go back and look at that, what else should they be looking for?
Well, a couple things. Again, to reiterate, he's going to be sentenced. Let me back up.
Okay.
If the U.S. government can prove by a preponderance of the evidence, not reasonable doubt, but by preponderance of the evidence, that the facts that he pled guilty to are the elements to satisfy second-degree murder, he's looking at life. He's looking at life. All right. Now Andy's going to try to knock that down, which he successfully did in the state trial. Obviously, they couldn't come up with murder. Right. The guidelines call for a life sentence, or up to a life sentence, but the plea agreement allows for a 3-point reduction, which moves them down a bit, and that's something not a lot of people caught on to. In the event the judge agrees that this was second-degree murder and obstruction of justice, he falls into these guidelines, which is this huge table here, of facing approximately somewhere between 14 and 18 years. Wow. Now the judge is not 100% bound by those guidelines, but 9 times out of 10 the judge will sentence him somewhere in those. Now, of course, that 14 to 17 range is going to be argued to be higher by the U.S. government and then lower. So if you take it from a practical standpoint, while they may aggressively try to convince the court to go for life, that would be a huge guideline jump, right? At the same time, if Andy tries to argue for probation or 3 to 5 or 6 years, something on that low end, that would be an awful low jump. At the end of the day, I think Judge Norton will have the ability and will sentence Michael Slager to somewhere between 10 and 25 years. And that's a broad range, but that's about 6 or 7 years on either side of what I believe those guidelines will call for. And so the question I've been getting for the last 2 days is, what's he going to get? And after researching it and all, my answer is somewhere between 10 and 25 is where I feel that this is going to end up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mark Peper, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate
You're welcome.
this.
Well, always a pleasure.
Likewise.
Okay.